Hello, welcome everyone. This is the next video installment of our Stump the Professor questions. Our next team here is team in our grad bag, and I will do my best humbly to respond to these important questions. Wow, they're so good. They're so rich. And we have a question about neurodiversity and communication in conflict, a really important topic. So thank you for throwing it into the mix. Let's start though with our first question, which is what is the difference between how conflict is handled when it includes emotions and when it does not? And a sub question in this one is can emotions be taken out of conflict successfully? All right, so I really love this question because it's going to help me clarify some really important things about the difference between emotions, emotionally regulated, and dysregulation of emotions. And I think the question is really getting at something more between emotionally regulated and dysregulated. But first, we're just going to deal with some of the more uh, upfront pieces of the difference between how conflict is handled when it includes emotion and when it does not. And boy, do I have a lot to say about this. Actually, I have a lot to say about all these questions. First, let's be clear. There is no version of conflict that exists without emotion. Emotion is not an extra ingredient. It is the medium through which us as human beings interpret the world, and it's how we emotions is how we navigate and create meaning and identity and figure out what's a threat or what's not a threat. That is all through the medium of emotions. So, can we take emotions out of conflict? Is basically like asking, is there a version of conflict that, okay, it's about, okay, here's where I want to go. That conflict is basically like the ocean, and you're basically asking, can we take the water out of the ocean and still have an ocean? That's what I hear when I hear this question. And you can change the water. It can be calm or stormy or shallow or deep, or uh, it can be deep and dark, or it can be turquoise and blue and foamy. Like, right, okay, there's all those words that we use to describe the ocean. Those, that's the language of emotions when we talked about that in week 5, right? We talked about vocabulary and increasing your vocabulary. So you can change the water, you can change your, you can think about how you are um, interacting with your emotions. And that's why we often want to learn how to get into emotional regulation. So I think what you're really trying to ask is how does conflict change? How does conflict change when we are emotionally regulated versus dysregulated? I mean, or we could be really asking, this is where it gets fun. And just like you trying to interpret what I mean when I'm asking you a question, I'm trying to interpret this. It could also mean that often we think that we have to be we can't express our anger, that somehow if anger shows up, you have a dysfunctional communication. So I want to dispel that myth. We do know that that anger or frustration or irritability are deeply connected to a lot of different things happening, which is why I put a lot of information up about anger itself because it's often misunderstood. And that we know that anger does not mean the end, or or things are necessarily bad. uh, but can we weather the stormy waters of anger and get into calmer waters, which is still emotion? Calmness is an emotion. being logical, straight, uh, even if I were to say I'm going to be robotic and I'm just going to lay out the facts and I'm not going to include any connotative language, that's still an emotion too. So let's be clear about it, right? So, one thing I want to kind of shift this into about the emotionally regulated versus dysregulated, right? We talk a lot about dysregulation and regulation in the class, right? And just as a reminder, when we're talking about emotional regulation, we are naming our feelings, we're staying grounded, we're being curious, we're protecting our goals. I made a list here. Checking perceptions, setting boundaries, and of course, taking breaks as needed and not weaponizing any of these things, not being pandering or patronizing or using tone in aggressive ways. This is when you are emotionally regulated, you are coming in with all that curiosity and perception checking, which I'm actually, the next question has a lot of perception checking kind of language that I'll address. And so a better way to think about how you come at emotions in a conflict is actually more to think about color palette. So an artist who is using a color palette, they've got all these different colors, you know, reds and burnt siennas and umbers and turquoises and navy blue and true blue. I mean, there's just so many different richnesses to different kinds of colors. And when you are choosing which color to use to come into a conflict, we wouldn't want any color, we can't have any color at all to, we need to paint on our conflict canvas. Which colors we use can really shape how we move through that dialogue. How are we expressing ourselves, and how are we knowing how to self-monitor so that we can be appropriate and effective and deal with the complexity of the situation, even when it's a small, simple thing. I hope that's one thing you're taking away from the class. It is complex. Ooh, it is mixed up with all sorts of things. So I hope that helps kind of answer this question, that we are really thinking about this color palette. Conflict is the canvas, and our color palette is the emotions. Here I am with that metaphor. Actually, I think Gracie, you had the highlighters, which was wonderful, which could also be a way to think about how we are approaching it. So I hope that helps answer that question. I'm going to move on to question number 2 now. Well, before I do, let me just make sure. Yeah, I covered what I needed. Our next question is, what's a one sentence, non-academic, right? You are in an academic world. I love this. Non-academic way to use the triangle of meaning, our semantic triangle, in a meeting or group dynamics or in a dialogue, to clarify the meaning behind a word being used. So maybe there's a word. So okay, so this is really important. I love this question. So yes, we have been learning in this academic setting all these theories, and then you have to take a theory and turn it into a construction of a message or deconstructing messages. So the semantic triangle just makes you aware that people have different things that they put as their referent to the reference to the referent, uh, that is shaping how they're using words. And you're trying to, especially in team dynamics, or if you are actually a supervisor in a situation, or and I want to address this later in this question. What if you don't have the power and you have to clarify meaning? Because I think that's even more difficult than when you do have a position of power in a meeting and you can shape the discussion, you can drive agenda and norms specifically to kind of get ahead of this idea. But sometimes you're sitting in a meeting and you can be a leader but have no power. So what are those things? And I think this would be here. I just jotted down some phrases that you could say. I think we're circling around this idea. I think we're circling around the same idea. Or I hear that you're circling around this, but I'm not sure what you mean by it. Right? So, thinking about that like idea of, okay, we need to get into the target. We need to get focused. We need to get concrete with our language. And maybe someone, even this can be difficult if you're dealing with an over talker, because an over talker is using language and words to dominate space, and it's completely under their awareness, or cover up insecurities, or people who come into spaces unprepared will often start riffing off of other people's ideas, but they're always kind of circling around it. They're not moving into concrete language. So hold someone accountable. Say, I feel like you're circling around this, but I'm not really hearing what you need. What do you mean when you say? Right? Uh, and there's different ways to word that. Uh, I think we might be using the same word, but we're talking about it in a different way. So I just want to make sure that I know what you mean when you say this. It doesn't have to be patronizing. You're trying to slow things down. Monochronic culture is going to feel like might be a waste of time, but it actually it actually helps time later. So people don't just go leave the meeting and everybody's doing something different based on their own interpretation and then coming together. And now we got to spend hours trying to figure it out again because we didn't get to the concrete meaning in the dynamic. Okay, another way to say it is, can we pause here? I just need to pause. I just want to do I just want to check to make sure, or it's a type of perception checking, but maybe that feels kind of academic-y to say perception checking, but you say, I just want to pause when you said A, I wasn't sure if you meant B. Or you could say, I didn't know if you meant A. Did you, or did you mean B? When you, okay, when, blah, 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 blah. Okay, here we go. I just want to pause here and do a check-in. When you said A, I didn't know if you meant B or C. Is it that or something else? Right? So one of the things I'm doing is I'm naming what they said. I'm giving what I thought it might mean, and it's it this or this. You could just do one, or two is nice. It depends. You want to do two if there's more tension, but if you just need one, that's okay as well. And then the last thing I was doing in that phrasing is getting the mic back to them and being opened that it could be something that I didn't even think of at all. And that's really important. Three is the magic number in this. I'm naming what I heard. I'm not sure if it meant step two. I'm not sure if it meant this, but I want three. What did you mean by it? Did it mean B, or is there something else that I'm missing? And as soon as you do that, uh, you open up into dialogue. Now, if you're dealing with someone who actually is just an over talker and is unprepared or is skirting around the issue, you could get an aggressive pushback. You could end up in an escalation of conflict that wasn't your intention. You're actually trying to avoid a conflict later on. and someone could feel called out. And that you can let it go. If someone gets defensive at you, moves into attack, you just say, okay, I just wanted to check. Pull back a little. That's not avoidance. It is a type of accommodating, and pull back. And then when you're not in a group dynamic, when we're back to question one, when we're more emotionally regulated, pull that person aside and just say, hey, I'm sorry. I just really was, needed your help to understand. Or don't say sorry. That's my garbage. But come at it in your own way and just pull someone aside and just say, I really do need some clarity on that. Uh, and that can often, um, when they're not in a public setting, you might actually get the clarification you need. And it would help build trust for when you're back in the team meeting. Another way to say it, okay, I have one more here is just so I'm in alignment, uh, I'm going to do, when I do A, I'm going to do this. And they're like, no, 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 that's not what I meant by A. And you're like, okay, great. What did you mean then? Right? Get that microphone in their hands. Okay, now I just want to address at the very end of this question when you have to talk up, when you're in a really power dynamic with certain bosses or certain supervisors. Uh, Sometimes this can feel like a challenge to power, especially for high power distance individuals who say you don't question authority. A question of authority means you are not loyal. It kind of gets translated as not being loyal, or you're not in the tribe, you're not in the group, right? It can really bring up hackles. So you want to come at it by taking some responsibility and just say things like, I want to deliver this the way you need it. So I want to do a check-in on what I heard and say, I'm going to do this. And they're like, well, I don't have time to listen to you process. And you're like, okay, um, but can you click? So I just want to make sure I understand, right? Because I don't want to waste the time of anyone, and I want to make sure I get this the way you want it. And make them take responsibility if they don't have time to be in the meeting and process it, but you said it out loud at least once. Another thing when dealing with tricky power dynamics is, I want to meet your expectations, is a great lead in, and then clarify the meaning. I wasn't sure what you meant by this, or what would it look like if we did do this? What should it look like at the end? What are you expecting? Set the expectation. Get people accountable. So sometimes how high power distance people use really abstract language, and then when they are held, then you deliver something, and all of a sudden you're the one in trouble for not interpreting abstract language. So you want that concrete language. And sometimes it creates other conflicts. It sometimes creates a little rift, but then sometimes it's really appreciated, especially if you are the kind of person on a job who really is showing up, and you have built your social network and your credibility in other ways, and then you're asking for a clarification. They know you're going to deliver. It's really powerful kind of way. So think about how people are using language, abstract language versus concrete language, and then also take accountability, acknowledge responsibility, take accountability where you can, and uh, take feedback as it's coming at you. And a lot of people, some people in the class are reading the feedback book, which I think addresses some of these things as well. Okay, there's one more question, so I'm not done. I hope I gave enough tools there for that one. It's a tough one. Um, let me get some water. All right, this one's a big one. How do we accommodate our conflict management styles for individuals with neurodivergent disabilities? Ta-da, here we are. All right. One thing I want to say about this is first, we want to be clear. And I think the question is, how do we accommodate? And so I think the question already is doing this, but just to make sure we're concrete, we should never be fixing neurodivergent people or trying to change them. The task is really to how do we adapt or adjust our communication so everyone has equal access to clarity and dignity and shared meaning, right? Right. Which I love this. I love the way these three questions kind of overlap each other in the team, even though each person in the team came in completely with a different question. They just go so well together as a set. Um, so that means that what we're really trying to do is make clarity the baseline, not the expectation. Because when you are clear, uh, and when I say clarity, I'm really talking about how we are setting up expectations and norms and the way that we approach uh, conversations, which I am trying to model in your team meetings when I say this is how you should actually always say your name, and you should be saying each other's names often in team dynamic settings. Even like you say, oh, I'm done, or Brianna, do you have anything? Or Gracie, do you have anything? Right? Like when you use each other's names in the meeting throughout, you create a baseline norm, and that should be for everything. And it shouldn't be like, oh, I'm dealing with someone who's neurodivergent. And yeah, we want to adapt, just like we learn about adapting for culture. We want to adapt ourselves to neurodivergent. But the things I'm saying are actually things that would be helpful for everybody to a certain extent, right? With some differences here and there that need to be thought about. Okay, so I'm talking about, let me see, let me get to what, so that baseline of this idea of clarity is really important. That's the really important thing. We want to be concrete in our instructions. We want to have expectations that are clear, and if there's a timeline involved, so if we just go back to a group dynamic, having very specific timelines and boundaries that are very explicit. What do I mean by explicit? It means that I'm saying it out loud. I'm not it's not an invisible boundary that, oh, I'm going to see if you cross this. It's going to be a test. Did you cross my boundary? No, I'm going to be explicit. This is a boundary. This is the norms. And clarifying those doesn't put the burden on the neurodivergent person to do that for the group. You make it clear from the beginning. So really what we're trying to do is avoid mind reading culture. And I'm not going to call it high context culture, because high context culture is a very, and I think I heard this in one of the groups. and or one of the discussions, right? High context, yes, if you are part of a high context culture, if someone does something, you know what that means because you are raised in it. That's a very different thing. I want to avoid mind reading culture. And what I mean by that is um, that idea of abstraction, or you should have known what I meant, or I really expected you to give me this gift. And if you can't give me the gift that I want, then you must not know who I am, or whatever things that we make up that somehow if you're playing this weird game where I want you to guess who I am as a test to see if you are deserve to be here or deserve the relationship or deserve the job. And we want to avoid that. I hope that's clear, the difference between like what Edward T. Hall is talking about with a high context culture versus a mind reading culture. So instead, when if we're going to make it explicit and we're going to say it out loud, you say, here's what I'm thinking. We're going to say things like, here's what I'm hoping for, here's the timeline, here's when something is due. Or just like we talked about in question number 2, let's check in to make sure we are using this word the same way. What do you mean? What do you, here's what I mean when I say that word. How are you interpreting that? Just make that the norm, make it the baseline, and that make that perception checking the baseline. And then, okay, so that's all about that kind of message construction and uh, thinking about that. The next piece about adapting for neurodivergency is also making it normal to give time and processing space. And this is especially important in conflict. So if you are the person sitting in power, what is the space that you're going to give to the other person to process what's happening? So we have a conflict, something's come up, and now you're going to say, let's just take a moment. I don't need an answer right now, right? Or if you know you are feeling flooded, and the person comes in with this urgency to fix power, right? So someone without power will often come right in with the urgency to fix things. Uh, and if you are still in a flooded space, you might say, let's pause and let's revisit this in, and then give the time, right? The time and the deadline and the due date and that promise of return is really where trust is built and reliance, and make it within the next 10 minutes, especially if you have the power. You should be able to self-regulate yourself to step away and then step back in. And if you need more time, if the conflict has really activated you or triggered you into um, engagement that you don't feel like you're in control of, then you really need to think about the work you're doing on your own before this moment and do some repair work there. Take some responsibility for that. And then follow it up with something in writing as well. I say, okay, we've agreed to X, Y, and Z, then say, I expect, if you have, maybe you expect the other person, I need you to send me an email within the next 24 hours that lays out what we agreed to, which is X, Y, Z. Or take it on yourself and say, I'm just going to send you an email. I'll be putting a read reply. I'll expect a reply back. And this is again, that time piece. So accommodation is really, when we create accommodation, we are creating a type of procedure that has that is a type of justice. It's that kind of equal access to uh, allow for inclusion. And we want that equal access and that procedural justice. And I just say, let's make it the norm. Let's make it the norm. Oh, someone's hammering right outside my window. It's very distracting for me, though. Hopefully Zoom is filtering it out for you. Okay, let's see. Is there anything else? There's a lot more to be said about this. This is a really important topic. There's things about nonverbals and face work, how we use tone and soften our language, and uh, we want to spend time building what the problem is with the other person so that it can really, I have to pause. The hammering is really distracting. Hold on a second. Well, it's for a good reason. I closed my window, but it's for a good reason. There is a tree outside my house that is pretty sick, and I guess the city is coming by to work on that. So, okay, I'm back. Where was I? All right. The last thing I want to add, I actually don't know exactly where I was at, even though it was literally 1 minute ago, I paused it. Um, the last thing I want to name is this idea about accountability in all spaces. And we want to be sure that I'm going to put up a statement about this in writing as well, because I'm not sure how, no, I am sure how I want to say it. Like, basically, we want to always hold everybody accountable in all spaces. Just like anyone else, neurodivergency is not an excuse to be uncivil, to be unkind, and it's not an excuse for harmful behavior. Everyone needs to be accountable for that. And so, one thing that happens often, depending on the experience you're in, is that sometimes some types of neurodivergency uh, become uh, their voices sound, not for everybody. It's just sometimes voice or tone can sound aggressive, and that could activate you. And that's a good place for perception checking and just saying, I just want to make sure that I heard your volume go up. Are you upset right now, or are you angry at me? And clarify it. Just say it out loud and clarify it. People who are neurodivergent that are really trying to always adapt to the world, um, they want to be a part of the world. They want to be successful and included. And when you do a perception checking, just a quick little one, uh, they could say, "No, I'm not angry. That my voice. I'm just passionate about what I'm saying." You're like, "Okay, great. Then continue." And then you've clarified and not put yourself at the center of the situation, and you're giving them room to communicate the idea that they need to communicate. Um, but then we want to differentiate that from content. So it doesn't matter who it is. If someone needs to be always accountable to the content of their information, and we need boundaries, respect, clarity for things that are non-negotiable in the message construction, in the construction of a message and the content of a message. And you don't have to attack the person. You don't have to say anything. You're not trying to fix them. Remember, we're not trying to fix people. We're not trying to convince people. Just saying, and this is why baselines are, that comment is inappropriate. We don't speak to each other that way. Please restate your message. Or I need us to stay respectful. Should we take a break and clarify that part? These are really difficult things you're slowing things down, and you need to practice leaning into them. When you take yourselves into roles of leadership, it's really trying to take responsibility for yourself and um, create access and fairness, but not shield people from accountability. So create, I hope that makes sense. I hope I'm saying this in a way that is clear. On a, this brings me to another point that it doesn't matter whether you're neurodivergent or not. A lot of people will say, well, I'm just being honest. And you're using the word honesty as a weapon to be hurtful or harmful. And that is not okay. Uh, my husband's calling me. So that means that boy, this is just the hour to make the meeting. But I think I made my point clear that we want to always know where our boundaries are and be clear about that. And directness or weaponized honesty uh, is are not licensed to do harm. There are ways to be direct and clear and have clarity. There's ways to have honesty that has gentle startups and is an invitation to join in to an idea that isn't about harming but holding accountability. Okay. Wow, these topics feel really big. So I hope it was helpful. This was a really important one. Thank you for your beautiful questions.